the last 70, 75 years, even longer, drug law enforcement and arms law enforcement have been methods to politically and through the systematic subversion of the justice system control Americans. Politically control Americans and control through the hammer of institutionalized terror. And that's the domestic end of this drug and arms boondoggle.
So on the one hand, overseas, we use it as a tool of policy, supporting the people we like and eliminating the people we don't like. And then at home, we use it to keep people under the thumb.
As a method of political, social, and ethnic manipulation. And these are unstated policies in the press. But if you study the history, if you read a couple of books, 5 or 6 books, take out a month of your time to actually research it, all the facts are there. This is documented. It's factual. I'm not making this up. It doesn't even have a wisp of paranoia to it. It's just true. It's just a fact. And if you look at what these people have done and what they're doing and what they say behind the scenes, it becomes evident that this is actually absolutely a fact. But the media, which is the X factor determinant in this, is both working for the oppressors and afraid of them and can't report on anything of substance because if they do, they'll go to prison like Bradley Manning.
And then the horrible example, Gary Webb. I mean, if that's not a warning to journalists, what can happen to them?
Well, Gary Webb wasn't the first person, and he wasn't the last. I mean, he was just kind of the latest. But I could tell you, a lot of examples of journalists and writers who've been persecuted and driven crazy and insane and imprisoned because they even hint and suggest what the truth is. I knew Gary. Feel bad for what happened to him, but to make him seem like an exception is a mistake. There's a lot of other people out there that suffered the same way.
Well, that might be a great topic for a show because I don't think people realize how thoroughly controlled the news media is.
Well, Americans happen to be basically dumber than dirt in that respect.
However, there is interest in this, and it's true someone could take a month out and read several books, and I would recommend yours, by the way, as some of the books to read. But, people don't generally take a month out to read about anything. Even when they're dying of cancer, they won't even read about that.
Right, and it doesn't mean that somebody is capable of understanding either.
Well,
it's not like everybody can understand this stuff that's going on. Even some small fraction of people want to understand.
I mean, it won't be 100%, but I think people understand bullies. They understand liars. They understand deception. It's very valuable and helpful to lay out the fact. I think the point you made earlier bears repeating. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not speculative, gee, I think this is going on. This is documented history that no serious historian who looks into this debates. It's the way things run. And yet when it appears in public consciousness, it's always, oh, do you think really? Or you hear general statements like, oh, yeah, the government's running the drugs, but nobody knows the details.
In 1951, there was a thing called the Kefauver Committee. Big problem with the mafia after World War II. The mafia had collaborated with the United States government in World War II on an unheard of, vast, nationwide scale that moved overseas and existed overseas as well when the CIA formed official relations with the Italian mafia and the Jewish mafia, what people call the kosher nostra. And they came back from World War II vastly energized and empowered. And they were controlling American cities all across the country as a result of this Faustian pact that they had made with the government. And Congress looked into it through this Kefauver Committee. Kefauver was going to be running for president. He wanted to get a name for himself. So they went into all the major cities and they did investigations. And at the end of it, they said, and this is a paraphrase, not an exact quote, that through the vice squad pattern in police forces in major cities, politicians were able to control the rackets in these major cities. In other words, the prostitution, gambling, narcotic cops were taking kickback from particular pornographers, gamblers, drug dealers in the mafia. passing it up to the chief or the cap in the particular precinct or ward. He was kicking it back to the politicians who appointed the cops and made sure the cops get into business. And those politicians were kicking a portion of that back to the industrialists who put them in power and making sure that the cops delivered the dope to the blacks and the Puerto Ricans and the poor people so that they could control legislation and direct contracts to their cronies. And this is what the Kefauver Committee concluded. This was their main conclusion in 1951. Nothing's changed. Not only has nothing changed, you can extrapolate that to the national scene, where the vice squads, the ATF, the DEA, are kicking back, are performing the same function for congressmen and senators and the executive in the White House, enabling them to control the rackets the same way. It's exactly the same thing that's happened. And the Kefauver Committee said, there's nothing we can do about it. And that's right, because even if you become aware of this, and people have been aware of it for 60 years, what are you going to do about it? You see, and even if you know what I'm saying to you, or you read books and you find out, well, the Kefauver said this, committee said this existed 60 years ago, and it's the same thing nationally. Well, what are you going to do about it? Well, you can't do anything about it, because the national security state is this huge castle with huge walls and a moat around it. Then you can't get inside of it. And that's the situation we're in nowadays. So even if you do have an inkling or a full, complete understanding of what's going on, 5 seconds later, you chase it out of your mind because you know there's not a damn thing you can do about it. And that's the big problem. The big problem is that we don't live in a democracy, where if a majority of the people realize that it's a corrupt government and it's control and all the secrecy that's built into it is enabling these rackets to exist, that they can't do anything about it. Just like you have no power when a cop arrests you for speeding. You get a ticket. You got to accept it. It's control. And the federal government controls everything you do. And there's nothing you can do about it. You either get used to it or you live riled up and in frustration. Basically, there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, the knowledge is useful because it keeps you from at least psychically supporting these people. In other words, not that it matters, but the more people know, the better. I don't know how that will play out, but it's better for people to know what's going on than not know what's going on.
Well, I'll give you that, yes. But, it's like saying, I know I'm dying of cancer. Well, that's comforting. As opposed to, I know I'm dying of heart disease. They're still controlling you and telling you everything to do. And anytime you step out of line, they're still putting you in prison. So until those things are changed, nobody's really going to be free.
This will never happen, or it won't happen under current conditions, is, for instance, if drugs were to be decriminalized, legalized, then that whole thing goes to smoke. What do? It's not illegal. You can't have all these cops on the payroll doing nothing except taking bribes. You can't have the CIA running operations and these different... That would make that go away, which is why I think that drug legalization or decriminalization won't happen. And they always give the reason, it would be a humanitarian disaster if we let drugs be legal. Everybody would take them. There'd be people lying in the streets, dying of overdoses. And that's why we're keeping all this going for you.
If you look at every other country in the world where they don't have these, to use the cliche, draconian drug laws, they're not rolling in the streets, with needles sticking out of their arms and coke pipes shoved up their nose or whatever. People want to get on with their lives. They want to live healthy lives. The object of all human beings, just like all of God's creatures, trees and plants, animals, little wrens, elephants, tigers, is to lead a happy, natural life. And if they don't have to take drugs, if they can lead a natural, happy life, they will do so without drugs. But when the government's pushing drugs on you and creating conditions that are conducive to taking drugs, for example, a pharmaceutical industry that basically is part of this social and ethnic manipulation, political, social, and ethnic manipulation that goes on, an advertising industry that every time you turn on TV, it's saying, take a pill because your left finger hurts. And the next commercial says, no, 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 don't take that pill, take this pill. It's better for your left finger. This has been going on for 70 years in a huge way as well. Until you can take back control of advertising, which means making the airwave publicly owned and not privately owned, and get rid of all this advertising, until you can take control of the pharmaceutical industries, which means nationalizing them, which means taking the profit out of healthcare. These things aren't even going to begin to become possible of legalizing drugs. So legalizing drugs isn't something that you get to through a vote. Legalizing drugs is something you get through by reorganizing society. And as long as the Romney vulture Obama capitalists are in power and control the national security state and the information, that ain't going to happen.
And in truth, they don't even control.
Well, yeah, they're the front men. It's the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and, God, I hate to say it, the Sheldon Adelsons and just like a lot of creepy people out there, the Koch brothers. Those are the people, a lot of people we don't even know who buy and sell the politicians.
Well, good. We've covered a lot of ground here, and I think we started out with a somewhat limited discussion about Mexico. Once you start unraveling one thread, it really does lead to this discussion we're having. Because it's not about the guns running to Mexico. It's not even about the current drug operation in Mexico. It's not even about the history of the U.S. supporting drug operations all over the world. It is about control. It is about a few people conspiring, literally, to keep the majority of the people in a controlled and controllable state. Thus, no news media, thus crappy education.
And what I'm saying is you can't unravel. You can't stop these minuscule drug and gun operations in Mexico by trying to change them. You have to change the system that enables them. Because right now, there's 40 other operations that are ongoing. The same exact thing. While you're looking at this particular shell, 40 other shell games going on. This is just a shell game. If they can keep you focused on gun runner, you're not going to be looking at what's important. I hate to say it, but this is just another distraction.
Well, it's all about misdirection. It's the great magician's trick, even in martial arts, even in warfare. It's the ultimate skill is to misdirect the attention of your enemy. So, hey, Doug, thank you so much. The books, again, The Phoenix Project, The Strength of the Wolf, and The Strength of the Pack, including other books too. But if you want to understand the so-called drug policy and the history of it in the United States, these are the books. And also we're going to get into a discussion of Phoenix program in another call. Doug Valentine, if people want to find your website, where do they go?
DouglasValentine.com.
There you go, DouglasValentine.com. Thank you so much. I hope this is the first of many, many interviews.
You're very welcome, and I'll try not to be so cynical next time.
Well, you're the guy that's doing all the hard digging, and you are the ones that's looking at this every day, and I understand the cynicism. But since you brought that up, if one more person understands what's going on, it's a victory. It's not a massive victory, but it's a victory, and big victories have to start with small victories.
I'm not dispirited, and I might be cynical, but it is ultimately a spiritual battle. You have to keep your spirits up, and there's lots of things that make life worth living, despite the fact that, like serfs in the Dark Ages, we're under all this control. There's still a lot of reasons to live and be happy. I suppose that there's always the possibility of some sort of French Revolution here. That would be the beginning of a change.
So we'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that was Douglas Valentine. You've been listening to Brass Check TV, and we'll see you next time.